you doing? It's Upman Joe. And if you ever wanted to have your own custom Scuf controller but really can't afford it, well, today I'm going to show you how you can build your own custom controller with any kind of shell that you can find on the internet with A and B tactile buttons on the back right where your fingers sit when you grip it. They're not paddles in the middle, they're right on the grips. In addition, I'm going to teach you how you can make your own hidden removable trigger stops that don't damage the controller and don't have any screws. And all of this cost me less than $20. Today I'm going to show you how to take an Xbox controller, put on a custom shell, and add tactile buttons in the back, as well as custom trigger stops that are completely hidden and removable. In order to do this, you're going to obviously need your Xbox controller. You're going to need a new shell. If you choose to use a new shell, you can do this with the standard Xbox controller shell. I just chose a different shell. You'll need some tactile buttons, which I do have a link in the description of this video. You'll need a soldering iron and some solder, some soldering flux, which this is optional, but it definitely makes the job a lot easier. An X-Acto knife, a 932 drill bit, a pair of tweezers, a hot glue gun, a T8 security Torx, and a T6 standard Torx. Now once we have our controller apart, this is what we're going to be left with. And again, in the video it shows you how to take off this board. Now I've already pre-soldered the wires and I'm going to show you where each wire goes, because this is the board that we're going to be working on. Now after we do our buttons in our controller shell and we do our soldering on our motherboard, we're going to actually use this shell and we're going to replace and put these triggers and bumper buttons on. So we'll show you how to do that after I drill the holes and do the soldering work on the motherboard. Okay, so the soldering work is a little bit too detailed for me to try to do on camera because my eyes aren't the greatest, so I need to use a magnifying lens so that I can see what I'm doing. So I'm going to show you the 3 soldering points that we need to worry about on the motherboard. And this is the board that you take out on top. We can leave them one main bottom motherboard in the controller. Okay, so the first point is going to be over here, and you'll see a little label marked B14. And I'll try to get a little bit closer. I don't know how well I can zoom in with the camera. Okay, and you'll see 2 little solder points there, and we're going to solder on the top. And that's our B button. The next point is going to be on this little set here. And you'll see that there are a series of 7 pins on the inside. And we're actually going to solder to the middle pin. So you can just count over 1, 2, 3, and it's the 4th pin in from either side. And we want to solder that. And again, I just run the wire straight down here and straight over here so I could wrap it around. And then I put just a touch of hot glue onto the board. Make sure you don't put it on any special parts, just to hold the wire so it doesn't pull off later, because I have pulled some of them off as I'm trying to reassemble everything. Okay, the next one is going to be on the back, okay? And there's actually in several places because there's a shared ground on this controller, and there's 4 grounds right here in the back. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, and I solder to this top corner one. Okay, so the best place to put these buttons is right about here. Okay, if we put them too low down on the inside, what happens is our rumble motors get in the way. So they need to be about here. And let me show you on this other controller that I did. Okay, now this is actually the first one that I did, and I actually did put this one down a little bit lower. And you see this little place where your headset adapter works. You want to be about even with that. Okay, and the best way to do that is going to be with some tape. So what you want to do is take a piece of tape and line it up with that line, and then use a ruler or a tape measure and check the distance here so that we can keep that straight. So then once you're done and you've checked your distance to make sure that this is nice and straight, we're going to go ahead and drill our hole. And we're actually going to drill our hole right on the edge so that the holes and the buttons are lined up with this. That'll give us enough room on the other side, and we won't have to do any kind of shaving on the controller. Now again, we want our button to be right about here centered, okay? So what I'm going to do, unfortunately I only have a black Sharpie, I'm going to make a little dot on each side. And it's not an exact science. I kind of just do it by eye. If they're not in the perfect spot, I'm fine with that. If they're not exactly in the same spot, so long as they're at the same height. Okay, now the best way to do this is to first drill a pilot hole. So just take your drill, and I'm going to try to do this here, and hopefully the camera can pick it up, and just drill a hole straight down through. Just a little pilot hole. That'll make it so that when you drill your larger hole, the drill bit doesn't go around too much. Okay, so now that we have our pilot hole, we can go ahead and change our drill bit out. Now, once you do that, change out your drill bit, and we're actually using a 932 drill bit. It's the one that closely fits our switches and allows for a little bit of play so that they don't get stuck as we depress them. And you just want to go right onto the middle of your pilot hole and drill your hole through. Now, once you've done that, you are going to have some shavings, which you're going to have to shave off a little bit with an X-Acto knife. And I just go in and out a couple times till I get all of those shavings out. So just come on the inside and just use your X-Acto knife, scrape out all those pieces. And you want to be careful on the outside, especially if you have a painted finish like this, otherwise you're going to screw up your finish. And I just kind of take the X-Acto knife and I run it around the inside of the hole. And the same thing on the other side. Now you can also do this with painter's tape and you won't have as much, but unfortunately I don't have any. And I do like this tape because it kind of gives me the line. Then we're going to go over and we're going to do the other side. And the same thing, just line it up with your pilot hole. Let me tighten my drill bit a little bit. And push it through. And I like to go slow at first and let the drill bit do the work, otherwise you may jump. And I'm through, and then I just pull it back out like that, and it gets all my pieces off. And then again, do the same thing and take your X-Acto knife and scrape out all the little pieces of plastic. And again, I apologize, I'm trying to do this so that the camera can see it, but it's not that easy to manipulate the drill and do that. And then once you're done, you can just pull off your tape, and then we'll go ahead and test the switches. And those holes look pretty good and pretty straight and even. Now again, these are the switches that I'm using, and these are actually 12 by 12 millimeter by 8 millimeter switches. And I believe that the head is about 6 millimeters, and like I said, the 932 drill bit is the perfect size. And I will put a link down on the bottom. I got them off of Amazon, and it's like $5 for 10 switches. Okay, so then once we're done, we're just going to put them on the inside and test it. Just hold it up against and test to make sure that it's nice and clicky. And that's how we drill our holes. And we'll just check the other side. Again, just drop it in and just test it. Make sure it's nice and clicky and it's not getting stuck. Okay, now we'll move on to actually doing the rest of the soldering. Now, one other thing I did forget to mention is that on these switches, I don't know if you can see them on the camera, there's a little post here which helps hold the whole switch together, but it kind of makes it so I can't get a nice flush fit on the inside. So what I do is I just take a nail file and just kind of file them down a little bit. Now you don't want to file them too much, otherwise the switch will come off, but just file them down a little bit so that you can maybe cut them in half. And again, a nail file seems to work really well for this if you don't have any kind of other file in the house. You know, and again, I'm just trying to cut maybe those posts in half. Just like that. Okay, so now that it's much smoother and it's going to be easier to go on. And you want to do that with both switches. Now, on the back of these switches, you'll actually see 4 legs. We'll actually have 4 legs. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. But we only need 2. So all you need to do is just take a little pair of nippers or a pair of scissors and just cut off 2 of those legs. Okay? Because we only need 2. And then just take the other 2 and you want to bend them. Now before we glue these in, you definitely need to go ahead and tin these. It'll make it much easier to attach the wires later on. So just make sure you tin them with your solder iron. And again, I'm not going to do the soldering on camera because I don't have the good eyes and I need to use a magnifying lens and the camera can't pick it up through that. But I will show you as I go along, and I'll stop and show you each step as we move. Okay, so now that we've got our holes drilled, we're going to put our buttons in, and remember we've already tinned the legs to make it easier for when we put our wires on. Okay, and we want to hold it on the one side and then just again double check that it clicks easily on the other before we add our hot glue. You want to try to get that button centered in our hole. So just once you get it in there and you can feel it's clicking, put a dab of hot glue around one of the edges. And just hold it there until the glue dries. And again, just double check your clicking as that glue dries because it's much harder to do once the glue is set in. And we're just going to hold that for a minute and let it dry. Now once that glue is set and held, just take your hot glue gun and surround the other 3 sides of your switch. Make sure you get some on the top to hold it in place, and don't put any glue where you have to solder your power to them. And I just use my finger and kind of rub it around a little bit. Remember, it is a little bit hot, but I've kind of gotten used to it. And unfortunately, you know, hot glue does get that nice stringy stuff. And we're going to just let that dry, and we're going to go do with the other side. And I'm not going to film the other side. There's really no reason to. You're just going to repeat the same thing on the other side. Okay, so now that we're done with drilling our holes and soldering our board, it's time to reassemble the controller and then solder the wires to the buttons themselves. So the first thing we're going to do, and again, we've already taken this apart and you've seen that video on how to do that, is put our triggers on. And again, the triggers just simply go on here, and then we use the screws that we saved to reattach them. And I'm going to do that off camera so that I don't lose the screw as I'm doing this. Okay, so now that we've got our trigger back together, we're going to take our board and we're going to put it in and then just screw it in. And what you want to do is, again, you have these 2 pieces have to line up and go on to the little peg down on the bottom. And the best thing to do is just kind of drop it in like this and give it a little push and you'll feel it kind of snap in. Make sure both sides are snapped in. Then just take your 2 screws and screw them in. Okay, so now that we have the motherboard back in, it's time to solder the wires to the buttons. Now you notice we only have 3 wires. We have this button, this wire over here is going to be our B button. This wire coming out of the bottom is the A button, and this is our ground. Now we do need a ground on each leg, but we've only soldered one there. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a wire and jump it from one button to the other. And the way we're going to do that is to take our B wire and just, our ground wire, I'm sorry, and just connect the 2, and then we'll solder both of them to one, and then jump it over to the other side. And again, I'm going to do the soldering off camera just because I need to do it under a magnifying glass to really be able to see that. So after I get that one done, we'll come back and I'll show you for the A and the B buttons. Okay, so now that I have my ground button soldered to both sides, I'm going to take just a little tiny dab of hot glue and hold down that wire. So now I just put just a little tiny dab so that, again, it doesn't move. and get pulled off accidentally as we put things back together. And I put a dab on each side. Now when you do this, make sure that you don't put so much wire from your buttons to the motherboard that you don't have a place to put it, but make sure you give yourself enough room so that if for some reason you do need to take your controller apart, you're able to do so, you know, without pulling on the wires. So I give myself about this much room, and then I'm able to put them all together. Okay, so the next thing that we need to do is attach our wires to our A and B buttons. Now remember, you had two wires here. You have one coming off the bottom, that's your A button, and you have the one coming off of the side, that's going to be your B button. And now you just need to decide which button wants to be which. Now for myself, I like to go with like basically the programmer, which is my right hand is my B button, and my left hand is my A button. So this will be for jumping, and this will be for, I'm sorry, my left will be for jumping, and my right will be for either knifing or for drop shotting, which is how I like to leave it. So I'll go ahead and connect those wires to the leads, and then we'll come back and finish up. Now that only took a second. And I apologize again for not doing the soldering on camera. However, I'm not the greatest solderer in the world, and sometimes it does take me a little bit. But that just shows you that if you have a basic knowledge of soldering, you can do that. This is a very simple installation. Just take your time and do it. And again, I do use a set of helping hands with a magnifying glass to help me see. Now, once you have that, again, do the same thing and put a little dab of glue just right here below where you put your legs, so that just in case you have a problem, you can still pull it off. However, you don't have to worry about the wires coming apart too much. And now our wiring is done, and we can simply go ahead and wire everything back up. We need to still solder our rumble motors back in, but I'm going to put it all together and test it first, and then we'll come back and we'll finish up. Okay, we're back, and after a little bit of a problem, we found out that one of the switches was bad and we couldn't figure out why the A button wasn't working. And it reminds me, there is a way that you can test your switches ahead of time. And what you do is basically run one leg from your switch to the red wire on a rumble motor, and then the other leg to the positive side of a battery, and then basically hook up the black wire on the rumble motor to the bottom of a battery, and when you press the button, the rumble motor should spin, and you'd know whether or not that switch works. And I actually forgot to do that ahead of time. So all that's left now is to attach the wires for the rumble motors to the board, and then reassemble everything, and we're all done. So I'll go ahead and I'll solder those on, and we'll come back for the final assembly. And then I'll show you one quick tip on how to do removable trigger stop so that you don't have to press your trigger all the way in. A very simple little fix. Now do remember, you don't have to put the rumble motors back in. If you want a lighter weight controller, feel free to leave them out. I choose to have them in. Okay, now that the rumble motors are back in, all we need to do is simply put the controller back together. Now, the first thing you need to do is make sure you put your thumbsticks back on, okay? And there is only one way to go on, and it doesn't matter which thumbstick you put on which side. Just put them in, turn them until they go in, give them a little push, and then put your front faceplate on. Okay, and I'm trying to do this upside down. So just put it on like that, and then you can turn it over. That'll hold your rumble motors in while we simply assemble the back. Just tuck your wires in. Now you will see over here these two little battery legs. Make sure that they are sticking out, and I've actually bent one of them, so I'm just going to bend it back just a little bit. And just, again, tuck your wires in. You'll need to push your triggers in a little bit. As you put this back in, it'll snap in. And then all we have to do is put our 5 screws back in. So let's go ahead and do that, and we'll just drop all 5 of them in. And there we go. A nice controller. I love these green skulls on here. New triggers, new bumpers, and most importantly, tactile buttons on the back. Now, the last thing I want to show you how to do is that we can make a trigger stop and without having to drill any holes into our triggers. And it's very simple. So what I'll do is I'll stop the video here. I'll get set up for that, and then we'll go from there. Okay, so the last thing we need to do is to install our trigger switches. Okay, now basically what the trigger switch is it's going to make it so that instead of pressing our trigger all the way down, we're only going to press it about halfway. Now many people do that by putting a screw into the top to hit the base right here. And remember, we still do have our handles removed off of here. Okay, but we need to get in here. So the trigger stop is going to make the trigger stop about right here, which is all it needs for firing in games like Titanfall and Call of Duty. Now, I really don't want to put screws in and have them done, and I also want to make them completely removable. So I found a great way to do that, and it's with nothing more than some leather. I got this over at Michael's for just a couple of dollars, and the best part is all we need is this little tiny piece. And what we're going to do is simply take this little piece of leather and glue it in here. And it'll basically stop our trigger right at the top of that. Now, it's not custom measured or anything like that to get the exact firing point, but it is about halfway. And all we need for this is this piece of leather, our pair of tweezers to hold it, and our glue gun. And just put just a dab of hot glue on the end and a dab underneath. And just slide it inside of your trigger up against here, and then take your trigger and hold it down to let the glue set. And then you can just let it up. We want to make sure our trigger doesn't get glued. And then do the same thing on the other side. Now when you do your glue, make sure you're putting it on the untanned side. You don't want to put it on the tanned side. That's what the trigger is going to hit. And again, just put a little bit underneath and a little bit over here on the back. Put it up inside like that. And then use your trigger to hold it in place for the glue to set. And that's it. We'll let that dry for a second, but now you can see when we go to fire, we only have to press it in a little bit. More than enough for Titanfall or Call of Duty or Battlefield, so we don't have to worry about that entire thing. Then we can just snap our outer pieces on, and our controller is completely done. And I think it came out very nice. Now you may notice from when I originally did it, I took off the bumpers. I kind of decided I liked the black bumpers better than the skull bumpers on here. It kind of did a little bit of a breakup. But I really do like the look of this controller. Guys, that's my video for today. If you like it, go ahead and hit the like button on the bottom. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel. And until next time, happy gaming.